Commander Zekth sat in the dimly lit cantina on Proxima Station, his 4 arms wrapped around a glass of fermented keth root. The purple liquid swirled as his hands shook slightly, a tremor that had never left him since the war ended 3 cycles ago. Around him, younger soldiers from various species laughed and boasted about their recent victories against the hegemony rebels. They had no idea what real war looked like. "Tell us another story, Commander," called out Lieutenant Vex, a young Altarian whose blue skin still held the bright hue of inexperience. "Tell us about the glorious battles against the Terrans." Zeketh's large black eyes focused on the eager faces surrounding his table. These younglings thought war was glorious. They thought the humans were just another species that had been conquered and absorbed into the Galactic Federation like all the others. They had no idea. "You want to hear about the humans?" Zeketh's voice was a low growl that made several nearby patrons turn their heads. "You think you're ready for the truth about what happened out there?" The young soldiers nodded enthusiastically. Zeketh took a long drink of his keth root and set the glass down with deliberate care. His cybernetic arm, a replacement for the one he lost on Kepler 438b, gleamed under the station's artificial lights. "Very well, but don't say I didn't warn you." Zekth's mind drifted back to when it all began. The Galactic Federation had been expanding for over 2,000 standard years. They had encountered hundreds of species across the galaxy, and the pattern was always the same. First contact, evaluation of technology and military capability, then either peaceful integration or swift conquest. The Federation's military machine was unstoppable. They had the best technology, the largest fleets, and the most experienced commanders in known space. When the Deep Space Scouts first detected the radio signals coming from the Saul system, nobody paid much attention. Another primitive species broadcasting into the void. The initial reports described a young civilization that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel. They called themselves humans, and their home world was a small blue planet in an unremarkable star system on the outer edge of the galaxy. The Federation Council decided on standard procedure. They would send a diplomatic vessel to make contact, assess the species' potential value, and then proceed with either integration or conquest based on what they found. It should have been routine. Zeketh remembered being assigned to the Advanced Reconnaissance Fleet under Admiral Korath's command. At the time, he was a young captain eager to prove himself. The human system was to be his first major campaign, and he expected it to be over within a few rotations. The reconnaissance fleet consisted of 12 ships, each carrying the latest in Federation technology. They had plasma cannons that could crack a planet's crust, shields that could deflect any known weapon, and enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Against a species that had only recently developed basic FTL drives, it seemed like massive overkill. When they arrived at the edge of the Saul system, everything seemed to confirm their initial assessment. The humans had a few small space stations, some mining operations in their asteroid belt, and a handful of exploration vessels scattered throughout their system. Their military consisted of primitive chemical rockets and nuclear weapons that were laughably outdated by Federation standards. Admiral Korath opened communications with the human government and delivered the standard ultimatum: surrender and accept integration into the Federation or face the consequences. The Federation had delivered this message thousands of times to thousands of species. Sometimes the aliens surrendered immediately. Sometimes they fought for a few days before surrendering. None had ever lasted more than a rotation against Federation forces. The humans' response was unlike anything in Federation history. "Thank you for your message," came the reply from someone identifying himself as Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. "We have discussed your offer and must respectfully decline. We hereby inform you that any hostile action against Earth or human colonies will be met with immediate retaliation. We suggest you leave our system peacefully." The bridge of Admiral Korath's flagship erupted in laughter. A species with primitive technology was threatening the mighty Galactic Federation. It was absurd. Korath ordered a demonstration of Federation power, targeting one of the human mining stations in the asteroid belt. The plasma beam struck the station dead center. For a moment, there was silence as everyone waited for the inevitable explosion. Instead, the beam simply dissipated against some kind of energy barrier. The mining station remained completely intact. Interesting, Admiral Korath muttered. They have better defensive technology than we thought. Scan that station again. The tactical officer's hands flew over his console. Sir, I'm reading massive energy signatures from the station. The power output is... Sir, this doesn't make sense. The readings suggest they're generating more energy than our entire fleet combined. Before Admiral Korath could respond, proximity alarms began screaming throughout the ship. The tactical display showed dozens of new contacts appearing throughout the system. Ships were decloaking all around them, emerging from what appeared to be empty space. Where did they come from? Korath demanded. Unknown, sir. They weren't there a moment ago. It's like they materialized out of nothing. The human ships were unlike anything in Federation databases. They were angular and brutal-looking, covered in what appeared to be some kind of reactive armor. Instead of the smooth curves preferred by most species, these vessels looked like they had been designed for one purpose: war. This is Admiral Chen again, the human voice came over the communications array. You have 30 seconds to leave our system, or we will interpret your presence as an act of war. Admiral Korath's pride wouldn't let him retreat from what appeared to be a handful of primitive vessels. All ships, battle formation, target the largest human vessel and prepare to fire. What happened next would haunt Zeketh for the rest of his life. The moment Admiral Korath gave the order to fire, every human ship in the system opened fire simultaneously. But these weren't energy weapons like the Federation used. Instead, streams of metal projectiles erupted from the human ships at incredible velocities. The kinetic rounds struck the Federation shields and simply passed through them as if they weren't there. The first ship to die was the cruiser Triumphant Glory. The human projectiles tore through its hull like paper, causing massive decompression that killed half the crew instantly. The ship's reactor went critical moments later, creating a fireball that could be seen from 3 systems away. Shields are ineffective against kinetic weapons, the tactical officer screamed over the chaos. They're using pure momentum to penetrate our defenses. 3 more ships died in the next few seconds. The human weapons were primitive by Federation standards, but they were also perfectly designed to counter Federation technology. Every Federation ship relied on energy shields for protection. No species in the galaxy used kinetic weapons because energy shields made them obsolete. Except the humans had never developed energy shields, so they had kept developing kinetic weapons to ever greater extremes. Return fire! All ships return fire, Admiral Korath ordered. The Federation plasma cannons lanced out toward the human fleet, but the human ships didn't try to avoid them. Instead, they flew directly into the plasma beams. The Federation officers watched in shock as the human vessels absorbed direct hits from weapons that should have vaporized them, then kept coming. How are they surviving direct plasma strikes? Someone shouted. The answer came from the science officer. Sir, their hull material, it's some kind of ceramic composite. It's absorbing and dispersing the plasma energy across the entire ship structure. And they're using some kind of liquid cooling system. The heat is being channeled away faster than we can apply it. Meanwhile, the human ships continued their relentless advance, pouring kinetic fire into the Federation fleet. Ship after ship died as tungsten rods traveling at significant fractions of light speed punched through their hulls. The Federation had never faced an enemy that could simply ignore their primary weapons while rendering their defenses useless. Sir, we're down to 6 ships, reported the tactical officer. Admiral Korath's flagship just lost main power. Zeketh, commanding the frigate Swift Victory, made the decision that probably saved his life. All power to engines. We're retreating. Sir, Admiral Korath hasn't given the order to withdraw, his first officer protested. Admiral Korath is dead, Zekth replied grimly, watching the flagship's life signs flatline on his tactical display. I'm assuming command of the surviving ships. All vessels, emergency jump to rally point 7. As the surviving Federation ships prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed, the human fleet made no move to pursue them. They simply watched as the mighty Galactic Federation fled in defeat for the first time in its history. Zekth's ship was one of only 3 vessels that made it out of the Saul system that day. 9 ships and over 15,000 Federation personnel were lost in less than 10 minutes of combat. It was the worst military disaster in Federation history. And it was just the beginning. The young soldiers in the cantina sat in stunned silence as Zeketh finished his account of the first battle. Their eager expressions had been replaced by looks of horror and disbelief. But how is that possible? Lieutenant Vex stammered. The Federation has the most advanced military in the galaxy. How could a primitive species defeat us so easily? Zekth's laugh was bitter. Primitive. That was our first mistake. We assumed that because their technology was different from ours, it was inferior. We never considered that they might have taken a completely different technological path, one that made our advantages irrelevant. He took another drink of Kethroot before continuing. You see, most species in the galaxy develop along similar lines. Energy weapons, energy shields, faster-than-light travel, artificial gravity. We all face the same physics problems, so we all develop similar solutions. But humans are different. They had spent their entire history fighting each other, perfecting the art of war against opponents with the same technology base. They understood something we had forgotten. What's that? Asked another young soldier. That in war, the most advanced technology doesn't always win. Sometimes the crude, simple approach that your enemy isn't prepared for is more effective than the most sophisticated weapon in existence. Zekth stood up from his chair, his cybernetic arm whirring softly. The humans had been preparing for war their entire existence. While we were conquering primitive species with overwhelming technological superiority, they were learning how to fight enemies who could fight back. When we arrived in their system with our energy weapons and energy shields, they were ready for us with weapons specifically designed to counter everything we had. He looked around at the young faces staring at him. But that first battle? That was nothing compared to what came after. The Federation Council was furious about the defeat. They sent the Third Fleet to finish what we had started. 50 ships, including 2 dreadnoughts and Admiral Vorthak himself. Zekth's expression grew even darker. The humans were waiting for them too, and by then they had learned from our first encounter. They had studied our weapons, analyzed our tactics, and prepared countermeasures for everything we might try. The Third Fleet lasted exactly 6 minutes and 47 seconds. The cantina had grown quiet around them. Even the older veterans at other tables had stopped their conversations to listen to Zekth's story. 6 minutes, he repeated softly. 50 of our best ships destroyed in 6 minutes. And you want to know the worst part? The humans broadcast the entire battle across the galaxy. They wanted everyone to see what happened to anyone who threatened them. It was psychological warfare on a scale we had never imagined. Lieutenant Vex leaned forward, his blue skin now pale with fear. What happened to Admiral Vorthak? The humans captured him alive, Zekth replied. They brought him aboard their flagship and offered him a choice. He could return to the Federation with a message, or he could die with honor on the bridge of his ship. Vorthak chose to deliver their message. Zeketh's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The message was simple. Any Federation ship that entered the Sol system would be destroyed without warning. Any Federation world that supported military action against humanity would be bombarded until it surrendered. And if the Federation attempted to attack Earth directly, the humans would begin systematic extermination of every Federation world they could reach. The silence in the cantina was deafening. Finally, one of the younger soldiers found his voice. "But that's impossible. They're just one system. The Federation has thousands of worlds, millions of ships." "That's what we thought too," Zekth said sadly. "That's what we thought right up until the humans proved us wrong. You want to hear about the real horror? This is only the beginning of the story. The worst was yet to come." He finished his drink and set the glass down with finality. "But that's enough for tonight. Tomorrow, if you still have the stomach for it, I'll tell you about what happened when the Federation decided to call the humans bluff. I'll tell you about the Procyon massacre and the siege of Kepler 438b. I'll tell you about the day we learned that humans don't just fight wars, they perfect them." As Zekth walked away from the table, the young soldiers remained seated in stunned silence. They had come looking for glorious war stories and found something far different. They had found the truth about what happened when the unstoppable force of the Galactic Federation met the immovable object of human determination. And they were beginning to understand why their veteran commanders never talked about the war with the Terrans. Some truths were too terrible to share, too horrifying to believe. But as they would learn in the days to come, the truth about the human warfront was far worse than anything their imaginations could conjure. The war that followed would reshape the galaxy forever, and every survivor would carry the scars of facing humanity's particular brand of warfare. They had thought they understood what war meant. They had no idea how wrong they were. The next evening, Lieutenant Vex found himself returning to the same cantina, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and dread. He wasn't alone. Word had spread throughout the station about Commander Zekth's story, and nearly 24 young officers had gathered to hear the continuation. They sat in nervous silence as the grizzled veteran approached their table, his cybernetic arm catching the light as he pulled out his chair. "You came back," Zekth observed, settling into his seat with obvious discomfort. "I wasn't sure you would." "We need to know," Vex said quietly. "We need to understand what really happened out there." Zeketh nodded slowly and ordered his usual drink. When it arrived, he stared into the purple liquid for a long moment before beginning to speak. After the Third Fleet was destroyed, the Federation Council went into emergency session. For the first time in our history, a single system had not only resisted our expansion, but had dealt us 2 devastating defeats. The politicians were screaming for blood, the military commanders were demanding revenge, and the citizens were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. He took a sip of his drink before continuing. The Federation's response was predictable. If conventional tactics hadn't worked, they would escalate. The 5th Grand Fleet was assembled, the largest military force in Federation history. 230 ships, including 5 dreadnoughts and the mobile battle station, Emperor's Will. Admiral Thekmore was given absolute authority to end the human threat by any means necessary. Zeketh's expression grew grim. "I was given command of a heavy cruiser in the 5th Fleet. After surviving the first encounter, I was considered one of the few officers who understood human tactics. The irony was that none of us understood human tactics. We had only seen the smallest glimpse of what they were capable of." The 5th Fleet had taken 3 months to assemble at the Federation's primary naval base at Rigel Prime. During that time, intelligence reports from deep space reconnaissance drones painted an increasingly disturbing picture of human activities. The Saul system was undergoing massive industrial expansion. Hundreds of new shipyards were being constructed, entire asteroids were being converted into manufacturing facilities, and the electromagnetic signatures suggested they were building weapons on a scale that defied understanding. "The humans weren't hiding their preparations," Zekth explained. "They wanted us to see what they were doing." They were sending a message that we were too proud to understand. They were showing us that they had 3 months to prepare for our arrival, and they were using every second of it. Admiral Thekmore had dismissed the reconnaissance reports as primitive posturing. The humans might be building more ships, but quantity couldn't overcome the massive technological advantage the Federation possessed. The Fifth Fleet carried experimental plasma lances that could cut through a planet's core, gravitational disruptors that could tear apart the molecular structure of any material, and enough firepower to sterilize an entire star system. When the Fifth Fleet arrived at the edge of the Saul system, they found it transformed. Where once there had been empty space, now there was a massive defensive network. Orbital platforms surrounded every major body in the system, from Mercury to Pluto. The asteroid belt had been converted into a fortress, with weapons emplacements built into every significant rock. And everywhere, human ships patrolled in formations that suggested military discipline beyond anything the Federation had expected. The humans had turned their entire system into one giant fortress, Zeketh said. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that they were broadcasting on all frequencies, sending messages to every world in Federation space. They were telling our own people what was happening, giving them real-time updates on the battle that was about to begin. Admiral Thekmore had been furious about the broadcasts, but there was nothing he could do to stop them. The humans were using communication arrays throughout the galaxy, relaying their signals through neutral territories that the Federation couldn't attack without starting wars on multiple fronts. For the first time in Federation history, a military campaign was being watched by billions of civilians across the galaxy. The human message was delivered by the same Admiral Chen who had spoken after the first battle. She appeared calm and professional as she addressed not just the Federation fleet, but every citizen of every world within transmission range. "People of the galaxy," she began, "you are about to witness what happens when a free society is threatened with extinction. The Galactic Federation has demanded our surrender and threatens to destroy our civilization if we refuse. We have chosen to refuse. What follows is not our choice, but it is our responsibility. We will show you what it means to fight for freedom." Admiral Thekmore responded with his own broadcast, reminding the galaxy of the Federation's 1,000-year history of bringing peace and prosperity to primitive worlds. He spoke of the benefits of Federation membership and the futility of resistance against superior technology and organization. The human response came from a different voice this time, a younger woman who identified herself as Colonel Martinez of the Terran Marine Corps. Her message was brief and chilling. "The Federation offers slavery disguised as prosperity. They demand submission in exchange for protection from threats they themselves represent. Today we demonstrate that there is always a choice. Freedom is never free, but it is always worth the price." The battle began at exactly 0800 hours, Seoul Standard Time. Admiral Thekmore had divided his fleet into 3 assault groups, planning to overwhelm the human defenses through multiple simultaneous attacks. The first group would assault the outer system, the second would target the asteroid belt fortresses, and the third would proceed directly toward Earth itself. What the Federation fleet encountered was unlike any defensive strategy in known military history. "The humans didn't try to stop us from entering their system," Zeketh explained to his increasingly pale audience. "They let us come in. They let us get deep into their defensive network before they revealed what they had really built." The first indication that something was wrong came when the lead ships of Assault Group 1 reported that their instruments were malfunctioning. Navigation systems were giving contradictory readings, targeting computers were unable to lock onto human vessels, and communication between ships was becoming increasingly difficult. "Electronic warfare," the fleet's chief science officer reported to Admiral Thekmore. "The humans are jamming our systems, but the technology is unlike anything in our databases. They're not blocking our signals so much as corrupting them." As the Federation fleet advanced deeper into the Saul system, the electronic interference grew worse. Ships began reporting that their computers were behaving erratically, that their weapons were targeting friendly vessels, and that their life support systems were cycling randomly between different settings. They had infected our ships, Zekth said quietly. Somehow, the humans had found a way to introduce malicious code into our computer networks, not just jamming our systems, but taking control of them. And we had no defense because we had never encountered anything like it before. The human strategy became clear when Assault Group 1 reached the orbital platforms around Neptune. Instead of engaging in direct combat, the platforms simply waited. They tracked the Federation ships with their weapons but didn't fire. They were letting the Federation's own corrupted systems do the work for them. The first ship to die was the destroyer Swift Vengeance. Its navigation system suddenly reversed course at full acceleration, slamming the vessel directly into one of its escort frigates. Both ships were destroyed instantly, their reactors creating a brief new star in the outer darkness. Similar incidents began occurring throughout the fleet. Ships would suddenly accelerate into collision courses with their neighbors. Weapons would fire on friendly targets, and life support systems would vent atmosphere into space without warning. The humans weren't destroying the Federation fleet. They were making the fleet destroy itself. Computer virus warfare, Zekth explained. Another concept we had never considered. We had always assumed that advanced civilizations would fight with advanced weapons. The humans fought with corrupted code and turned our own technology against us. Admiral Thekmore ordered an immediate withdrawal to regroup, but even that became a nightmare. Ships couldn't coordinate their movements because their navigation systems were compromised. Several vessels jumped to faster-than-light speed with incorrect calculations, disappearing forever into the void between stars. Others simply shut down completely, their entire computer networks overwhelmed by cascading system failures. It took 6 hours for the surviving ships of Assault Group 1 to retreat beyond the range of the human electronic warfare systems. Of the 76 ships that had entered the outer system, only 43 made it back. The others had been destroyed by their own malfunctioning systems or lost in botched FTL jumps. But the humans weren't finished. As the Federation fleet tried to regroup, they found themselves under attack from an unexpected direction. Human ships began appearing throughout the system, not from the direction of Earth, but from empty space behind the Federation lines. "Cloaking technology," Admiral Thekmore demanded. "Negative, sir," his science officer replied, studying the tactical displays with growing confusion. "These ships aren't decloaking. They're emerging from somewhere else entirely." The truth was even more disturbing. The humans had developed what they called quantum tunneling drives, a technology that allowed their ships to literally tunnel through space-time itself, emerging anywhere within several light years of their starting point. It was faster than FTL travel and completely undetectable until the moment of emergence. "They could appear anywhere at any time without warning," Zekth said. "Imagine fighting an enemy that could materialize behind your defenses, attack your supply lines, and disappear before you could respond." The humans had made themselves effectively omnipresent within their local space. The human ships that emerged from quantum tunnels didn't engage in prolonged combat. Instead, they would appear, launch a devastating volley of kinetic weapons, and then disappear back into their tunnels before the Federation could return fire. It was hit-and-run warfare elevated to an art form. Admiral Thekmore tried every tactical approach in the Federation playbook. He attempted to surround the human vessels, but they would simply tunnel away and reappear elsewhere. He tried to predict their emergence points, but their quantum drives seemed capable of incredible precision and could deposit ships virtually anywhere. He even attempted to retreat beyond their operational range, only to discover that human ships could tunnel much farther than anyone had imagined. "The Federation fleet was being slowly picked apart," Zekth continued. "A ship here, a ship there, always caught by surprise, always outmaneuvered. The humans were treating our massive battle fleet like prey, hunting us down one vessel at a time. The psychological effect on the Federation crews was devastating. They were accustomed to fighting enemies they could see and predict. The constant threat of sudden attack from any direction was breaking down military discipline. Ships began firing on sensor ghosts. Crews demanded transfers away from the front lines, and some vessels simply withdrew from the battle without orders. Admiral Techmore made the decision to attempt a direct assault on Earth itself. If the human military could use unconventional tactics, the Federation would respond with overwhelming conventional force. Every remaining ship in the fleet would concentrate their fire on the human homeworld, using their most powerful weapons to crack the planet's crust and end the war in a single devastating blow. The assault began with the 5 dreadnoughts taking position around Earth's moon. Each dreadnought carried planet-killing weapons designed to destroy entire worlds if necessary. Together, they had enough firepower to reduce Earth to molten slag within minutes. "Fire!" Admiral Techmore ordered. The planet-killer beams lanced out toward Earth, carrying enough energy to boil oceans and shatter continents. But as the weapons struck the planet's atmosphere, something impossible happened. The beams simply stopped. They encountered some kind of planetary shield that absorbed the energy completely, dissipating it harmlessly into space. "How are they generating a planetary shield with that much power?" Someone screamed over the communications channel. The answer came from Earth itself, broadcast on all frequencies so that every ship in the Federation fleet could hear it clearly. Admiral Chen's voice was calm and professional, as if she were discussing the weather rather than the attempted destruction of her homeworld. "The Galactic Federation has just attempted to commit genocide against the human species," she announced. "This action will not be forgiven or forgotten. All Federation personnel have 30 seconds to surrender unconditionally or face the consequences." Admiral Techmore's response was predictable. "We have you outgunned 5-1, human. Your planet should be a burning cinder right now. Surrender while you still can." Admiral Chen's reply would be remembered throughout the galaxy for generations to come. "You made a mistake, Admiral. You assumed we were defending just one world. You never asked where the other 8 billion humans went." The tactical displays throughout the Federation fleet suddenly lit up with new contacts. Ships were emerging from quantum tunnels around every major Federation world within 50 light years of Saul. Not just a few ships, but entire fleets. Hundreds of vessels appeared simultaneously around key Federation colonies, military bases, and industrial centers. "While you were sending scouts to watch our system," Admiral Chen continued, "we were sending scouts to watch yours. While you were building weapons to destroy our world, we were building tunnels to reach yours. You wanted to play the genocide game, Admiral. You just learned that humans wrote the rules." The reports began flooding in from across Federation space. Human ships were attacking Rigel Prime, the Federation's primary naval base. Other fleets were bombarding the industrial worlds of Vega and Altair. Quantum tunneling allowed the humans to strike anywhere with perfect strategic surprise, and they had chosen their targets with devastating precision. "They weren't just fighting us," Zekth said, his voice hollow with remembered horror. "They were systematically dismantling the Federation's ability to wage war. Military bases, shipyards, weapons factories, command centers, everything that supported our military was under simultaneous attack by enemies that could appear from nowhere and disappear before we could respond." The strategic situation became clear within hours. The Federation's entire military infrastructure was under assault, but virtually all of their fleet assets were concentrated at Saul, unable to defend their home territories. Admiral Techmore faced an impossible choice: continue the attack on Earth while the Federation burned behind him, or withdraw to defend Federation space and abandon any hope of defeating the humans. He chose to withdraw, but it was already too late. The human attacks had been perfectly coordinated to cripple the Federation's ability to support military operations. Even if the Fifth Fleet survived the journey home, there would be no bases to refit at, no shipyards to repair battle damage, and no supply lines to maintain extended operations. The humans had won the war before the first shot was fired, Zeketh concluded. They had studied us, understood our weaknesses, and prepared counters for everything we might do. When we finally engaged them in battle, we discovered that we weren't fighting for victory. We were fighting for survival. The young officers around the table sat in stunned silence. The scope of the human strategic thinking was beyond anything they had imagined. These weren't primitive aliens stumbling into victory through luck. This was a species that had turned warfare into a science and applied that science with ruthless precision. "But how did it end?" Lieutenant Vex asked quietly. "The war did end, didn't it?" Zekth's smile was bitter. "Oh, it ended, all right. But not the way you might think. Tomorrow night, I'll tell you about the final phase of the war. I'll tell you about the day the humans taught the galaxy what mercy looks like when it comes from the barrel of a gun." He stood up slowly, favoring his injured leg. "I'll tell you about the choice they offered us and why every Federation world begged their governments to accept it. I'll tell you about the peace treaty that redefined what it means to be civilized in a galaxy where humans exist." As Zeketh walked away, the young soldiers remained at their table, staring into their drinks. They had thought they understood the nature of warfare and civilization. They were beginning to realize that everything they believed about military strategy and galactic politics had been shaped by a universe where humans didn't exist. Tomorrow they would learn how the story ended. But tonight they would go to sleep, knowing that somewhere out there, beyond the edge of known space, a species existed that had redefined the very concept of warfare, and they would wonder what other assumptions about their universe might be equally wrong. The cantina was packed the following night. Word about Commander Zekth's stories had spread throughout the station, and officers from every branch of service had come to hear the conclusion of his account. The veteran himself seemed smaller somehow, as if the weight of the memories he was sharing had physically diminished him. He sat at the center of the crowd, his cybernetic arm resting on the table, and waited for quiet. "Before I tell you how the war ended," he began, "I need you to understand something about humans that we didn't learn until it was almost too late. Every species we had ever encountered treated war as a means to an end. You fight to gain territory, resources, or political advantage. You fight until you achieve your objective, then you stop fighting." Zeketh paused to take a drink before continuing. "Humans are different. For them, war isn't just a tool of policy. It's an expression of their fundamental nature. They don't fight to gain something. They fight to completely reshape the reality of their opponents. And they never stop fighting until that reshaping is complete." The retreat from Saul had been a nightmare beyond description. The Fifth Fleet, once the pride of the Federation Navy, was reduced to a scattered collection of damaged vessels limping home through hostile space. Human ships appeared without warning to harry their withdrawal, never engaging in decisive combat but constantly inflicting casualties and damage. But the real horror was what they found when they reached Federation space. Rigel Prime was gone, Zeketh said quietly. Not destroyed, not captured, gone. The humans had somehow moved the entire planet out of its orbit and transported it somewhere else entirely. The Federation's primary naval base, the shipyards, the military academies, the strategic command center, everything that represented Federation naval power simply wasn't there anymore. The reports from other worlds were equally devastating. Vega's industrial complexes had been dismantled down to the molecular level. Their atomic structure somehow rearranged into massive sculptures that spelled out messages in human writing. Altair's weapons factories had been converted into what appeared to be art galleries, displaying holographic presentations of human culture and philosophy. Centauri's military research stations had become gardens, their laboratories transformed into carefully tended parks, where Federation scientists were found unharmed, but completely bewildered. The humans weren't destroying our infrastructure, Zekth explained. They were proving that they could do anything they wanted with it. They were demonstrating technological capabilities that made our most advanced systems look like stone tools, and they were doing it with a precision that showed they had studied every aspect of Federation society down to the smallest detail. Admiral Thekmore had attempted to rally the scattered remnants of Federation forces at the backup command center on Proxima Centauri. The facility was heavily fortified and supposedly impregnable, protected by overlapping defensive systems and hidden deep inside a mountain range. It should have been safe from any form of attack. When Admiral Thekmore arrived at Proxima Centauri, he found the mountain range missing. In its place was a perfectly circular lake, and at the center of the lake was a small island. On the island sat the command center, completely intact and unharmed, but now isolated and defenseless. Surrounding the lake were what appeared to be human soldiers, though they wore no uniforms and carried no visible weapons. The humans had somehow moved an entire mountain range somewhere else and replaced it with a body of water. The technological implications were staggering. If they could manipulate matter and energy on that scale, there was no limit to what they might be capable of. A single human officer met Admiral Thekmore at the shore of the lake, Zekth continued. She introduced herself as General Sarah Kim of the Terran Strategic Command. She was polite, professional, and absolutely terrifying because she was completely calm. This was a being who could reshape planetary geography as casually as moving furniture, and she acted like it was the most natural thing in the galaxy. The conversation between Admiral Thekmore and General Kim was recorded and later broadcast throughout Federation space. The audio was clear and unmistakable, though many who heard it refused to believe it was real. Admiral Thekmore, General Kim began, on behalf of the Terran Defense Force, I want to express our appreciation for the educational opportunities your recent military actions have provided. Your tactical approaches have been most instructive. Educational opportunities? Admiral Thekmore had responded, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. You've destroyed half the Federation fleet and crippled our ability to defend ourselves. Destroyed? General Kim sounded genuinely surprised. Admiral, we've been very careful to minimize casualties on your side. According to our records, total Federation military deaths during this conflict number fewer than 3,000 individuals. Your own fleet actions resulted in more friendly fire casualties than that. The numbers were accurate. Despite the massive scale of the human attacks, they had somehow managed to disable Federation forces without significant loss of life. Ships were crippled rather than destroyed, personnel were captured rather than killed, and infrastructure was relocated or transformed rather than obliterated. You want to know the most terrifying part? Zeketh asked his audience. They had been holding back. Everything we had seen, all the devastating attacks and impossible technology, represented a tiny fraction of their actual capabilities. They had been treating the entire war as a training exercise. General Kim's next words confirmed this horrifying reality. We understand that your species considers this conflict to be a war. From our perspective, it has been a comprehensive evaluation of Federation military capabilities and societal structure. We have now completed that evaluation and are prepared to discuss the results. Admiral Thekmore demanded to know what the humans wanted, their terms for ending the conflict, their price for victory. General Kim's response would reshape galactic civilization forever. We want nothing from the Federation, she said calmly. Your territory, your resources, your political systems, these things are of no interest to us. What we want is for you to understand what you have been doing to other species for the past 2,000 years. The humans had studied Federation history in detail. They knew about every species that had been conquered and absorbed, every world that had been stripped of its resources, every civilization that had been forced to abandon its culture in exchange for Federation membership. They had documented the systematic suppression of independent development and the slow strangulation of creativity and progress throughout the galaxy. "You have turned the galaxy into a prison," General Kim continued. "A comfortable prison, perhaps, but a prison nonetheless. You offer security in exchange for freedom, prosperity in exchange for independence, and peace in exchange for the right to determine your own destiny. Most species eventually accept these trades because they believe they have no other choice." The humans had come to offer that choice. "Every species in the galaxy will be given the opportunity to choose their own path," General Kim announced. "Those who wish to remain within the Federation may do so. Those who prefer independence will be granted it and protected from retaliation. And those who wish to explore new possibilities will be given the resources to do so." Admiral Thekmore protested that such a system was impossible. The Federation provided stability and order to thousands of worlds. Without centralized control, the galaxy would descend into chaos and warfare. "You're probably right," General Kim agreed. "There will likely be conflicts as species adjust to their newfound freedom. Some worlds may make poor decisions and suffer as a result. Some civilizations may choose paths that lead to stagnation or decline." She paused before delivering the most important statement in galactic history. "But those will be their choices to make, and we will ensure that no one, including the Federation, interferes with their right to make them." The humans were declaring themselves the guardians of galactic freedom. They would not rule or conquer, but they would prevent anyone else from doing so either. The Federation could continue to exist, but only as long as membership remained voluntary and other species were free to choose different paths. "The technology demonstration was just the beginning," Zeketh explained. "The humans spent the next 6 months proving that they could monitor and respond to any threat against free species anywhere in the galaxy. They established what they called freedom stations throughout known space, installations that could detect any military buildup or aggressive action and respond with overwhelming force within hours. The freedom stations themselves were marvels of human technology. They appeared to be simple satellites, but each one was capable of independently defending an entire star system. They were connected through some kind of instantaneous communication network that allowed them to coordinate responses across galactic distances without delay. More importantly, they were staffed by artificial intelligences of incredible sophistication. These AIs could analyze complex political and military situations, distinguish between legitimate defensive actions and aggressive expansion, and make decisions about intervention with a speed and accuracy that no biological intelligence could match. The humans had solved the fundamental problem of galactic governance, Zeketh said. "How do you maintain freedom without creating chaos? How do you prevent oppression without becoming oppressors yourself?" Their answer was to create a system that could enforce the principle of self-determination without imposing any particular form of government or society. The transition period had been remarkably peaceful. Most Federation worlds chose to remain within the organization, but now they did so voluntarily rather than through coercion. Several dozen species opted for complete independence, and a few chose to form new alliances based on shared values or interests rather than geographic proximity or economic necessity. The Federation government itself underwent massive reforms. The military was reduced to a fraction of its previous size, focused purely on defense rather than expansion. The bureaucracy was streamlined to provide services rather than control, and most importantly, any world could withdraw from the Federation at any time without penalty or retaliation. But the humans didn't stop there, Zeketh continued. They began sharing their technology with any species that requested it. Not weapons or military applications, but tools for improving quality of life, advancing scientific understanding and expanding creative possibilities. Human medical technology could regenerate lost limbs and organs, reverse genetic disorders, and extend lifespans for any species. Their agricultural techniques could make barren worlds bloom and feed populations beyond anything previously imagined. Their manufacturing processes could create materials with properties that seemed to violate known physics. Most remarkably, they shared their educational methodologies. Human learning systems could help any individual reach their full intellectual potential, regardless of their species' normal limitations. Art, science, philosophy, and technology began advancing at rates that would have been impossible under the old Federation system. "They kept their promise," Zeketh said quietly. "Every species in the galaxy now has genuine choices about how to live, how to govern themselves, how to develop their potential. And the humans protect those choices with technology so advanced that no one would even consider challenging them." Lieutenant Vex leaned forward. "But what about the humans themselves? Where are they now? What do they want?" Zeketh's expression grew thoughtful. "That's the most remarkable part of the entire story. Once they had reshaped galactic civilization to their satisfaction, they largely withdrew from public view. They maintain their freedom stations and continue their research, but they don't seek to lead or control anyone. They seem to be content knowing that every other species in the galaxy is free to choose its own path." "But they're still out there?" another officer asked. "Still watching?" "Oh, yes," Zeketh nodded. "They're still out there. And occasionally, when someone gets ideas about returning to the old ways of conquest and domination, they receive a gentle reminder about why that's not a good idea." He gestured to his cybernetic arm. "I lost this original limb on Kepler 438b during one of the last military actions before the transition. A Federation hardliner named Admiral Grextall tried to reassert control over a world that had voted for independence. The humans appeared within minutes of his first hostile act and expressed their displeasure with his decision." "What happened to Admiral Grextall?" someone asked. "He was given the same choice they offered to all of us," Zeketh replied. "He could change his behavior, or he could be removed from a position where he could threaten others. He chose to change. He's actually running a refugee assistance program now, helping displaced populations find new homes. The humans have a way of helping people discover better versions of themselves." The cantina fell silent as Zeketh finished his story. The young officers who had gathered to hear tales of glorious combat had instead learned about a war that had redefined the meaning of victory, defeat, and civilization itself. "So that's the truth about the human war front," Zeketh concluded. "It was pure horror, but not in the way you might think. It was the horror of discovering that everything you believed about strength, progress, and civilization was wrong. It was the horror of realizing that the galaxy you knew was a shadow of what it could be." He stood up slowly, his cybernetic arm whirring softly as he reached for his payment chip. "The humans taught us that there are worse things than conquest and worse things than death. They taught us that the worst thing you can do to a sentient being is to rob them of the right to choose their own destiny. And they taught us that sometimes the most merciful thing you can do for your enemies is to show them a better way to live." As Commander Zeketh walked toward the cantina exit, Lieutenant Vex called out after him, "Commander, do you think we'll ever see them again? The humans?" Zeketh paused at the doorway and turned back with a slight smile. "Son, they're all around us. Every time someone chooses freedom over security, every time a species decides to explore new possibilities instead of accepting limitations, every time someone stands up for the right of others to be different, that's humans. They didn't just give us technology or political systems. They gave us an idea." He looked around at all the young faces staring at him. "The idea that the universe belongs to everyone who lives in it, not just to those who are strong enough to take it. And that idea is the most powerful weapon anyone has ever created." With that, Commander Zekth left the cantina and disappeared into the crowded corridors of the station. The young officers remained behind, staring into their drinks and contemplating a universe that was far larger, far more complex, and far more hopeful than they had ever imagined. In the years that followed, many of them would remember this night as the moment they truly understood what it meant to serve not just their own species, but the principle of freedom itself. They would carry Zeketh's story with them throughout their careers, and some would eventually share it with younger generations who needed to understand the true history of galactic civilization. And somewhere in the depths of space, human ships continued their endless patrol, watching over a galaxy where every species could choose its own destiny. The war front had indeed been pure horror, the horror of unlimited possibilities and the terrible responsibility of freedom. But from that horror had emerged something beautiful, a universe where anyone could become anything they had the courage to dream.